Just waiting on some people to come in. Hello, everyone. It is July 5th, 2020, day after the 4th of July. Here I am in southeastern Georgia. It is weirdly nice out. It has been scorching hot for a few days. It's been an odd little stretch of time, particularly with what's going on in the country right now, but also, I mean, coronavirus is going crazy in this state right now. Some of you might have followed my tweets, but in the county I live in here in Georgia, it is, I want to say, 560% increased in terms of diagnosis. I live in a small college town where I teach, and our numbers have just doubled pretty much every other day. It's madness. But before we get started, just a real fast cheers to everyone. Welcome. It's really nice to be back and doing this again, sharing the holiday weekend with people. What a weird 4th of July this was. I'm sure you're probably feeling it as well. Undoubtedly, either quarantined or limited in what you were doing. And I know here in my small town, and the small town that I'm from, all of the events were canceled. Luckily, the people around here chipped in with their fireworks and actually put on a show that was, I mean, up to the level of every city fireworks show that I've ever seen. And so that was something. It was nice to see something sort of cobbled together. But it was a weird 4th of July. I think for a lot of us, the idea of American exceptionalism is starting to not just be troubled, but it's starting to disintegrate before our very eyes. I've been following politics very closely for a few years now, and sort of ingratiating myself in history and learning about the history of this country. I've known the main and legitimate, authentic critiques of this country for a long time, but something about this year really made it hit. I think it was very odd with the way it felt and the way it sat. It made it very clear to me that the 4th of July is America's sort of secular Christmas. This idea that we're celebrating almost an immaculate conception, right? This idea that the founding fathers got together and created this perfect country, which I think is what a lot of us grew up with in terms of indoctrination. I certainly did. I grew up in what I've now come to call the cult of the shining city, which we'll talk about a little bit tonight. But basically, it's this white identity, neo-Confederate evangelicalism that taught me that America was perfect, and that the founders were divinely inspired, and that that America was God's chosen country, and it could never do any wrong because it was the arbiter of all that was good and just in the world. And now, we're living in this time where America's failing, just left and right failing. And I don't know about you, but I'm really frustrated about it, really pissed off about it. Watching the people I love suffer, not just from coronavirus, but the economic fallout of it. My family, I come from a factory family, prison guards and factory workers and stuff like that. And it's just always pissed me off to see how this country has failed them. But now it's undeniable. Like in the past, you could, lay the blame at the feet of people who ran factories and employers and stuff like that. But, this country has just failed to take care of its people. And during the coronavirus, not just the willful abdication of responsibility, but the constant tsunami of misinformation and misdirection and just, bad faith operations. And on top of that, a Congress that just refuses to take care of people. I mean, it's July 5th, which means that God knows how many Americans have now been evicted out of their homes due to no fault of their own. So I think it's very odd to celebrate the 4th of July in this time period. I found it useful for myself, and I don't know how you all spent it. And I hope you had the best one that you possibly could have had. I hope that you enjoyed your loved ones and you enjoyed some semblance of rest and relaxation and something that gave you energy. Um, I spent a lot of it in what I think is the necessary place to be, which is reflection, thinking about what America actually is, the difference between the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and the Constitution, which I just want to talk about very briefly. I didn't really know about this stuff until I was researching my new book, American Rule. I didn't. I kind of like. I think probably a lot of you was sort of taught that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution sort of just happened together, like they were just inseparable and then occurred. But the truth is that the Declaration of Independence was this document created, of course, by Thomas Jefferson, which talked about inalienable rights and freedom and equality, obviously from a slaveholder, which is some bullshit. But the Declaration of Independence, the actual first draft of it that Jefferson wrote, included this long condemnation of slavery. And there's like this indictment part of the Declaration where he actually lays everything at the king's feet and says, here are all the reasons we're declaring independence, and here are all of the crimes that you've committed. And slavery took up the majority of the time. And he gave it to Congress. And, who knows what would have happened? Who knows if it would have gone through or been ratified or presented? Who knows what would have happened with the idea of slavery and human bondage? But Congress rejected it. They sent it back, and they were like, "Yeah, that's not going to work for us. The southern states aren't going to go for that." So, they got rid of the Declaration of Independence that Jefferson wrote, which aspired for an America free of slavery. And then, a few years go by, and actually the Constitution wasn't in place. We had the Articles of Confederation. And because there were all these uprisings, there were like poor, regular Americans who thought with the revolution they were going to get a better shot. They believed that the new country was going to serve them better. And what ended up happening was they realized that things had just sort of moved from a king down to an oligarchy. And so you had a lot of rebellions, like Shays Rebellion is like the most famous one. But, the founders and the Federalists, so to speak, sort of realized that they didn't have any way to protect themselves against, rioting poor people. And on top of that, they didn't have a way to handle disputes between the states. And so they called together a convention to actually edit the Articles of Confederation. But James Madison got there before everybody. And while he was waiting on people to show up, he sketched out a brand new government and a brand new country. And when everybody started like filing into what's now come to be known as the Constitutional Convention, he's like, "Yeah, we're doing this." And people were like, "What the hell? We don't have authority to do this." And he's like, "Well, too late. Everyone's on board with this." So what they ended up doing was they argued a constitution that they actually didn't even have authority to talk about. And if you read Madison's notes, you see that left and right. So what ends up happening is the Constitution creates this very, very narrowed idea of government that, it's like a machine that's meant to seem like freedom, but actually keep people under control and oppression, both people of color, but also poor people, and obviously women who never even figured into the conversation. And they end up ratifying it. They lie about it. They create a ton of misinformation and propaganda, and we end up with what we have. But the problem, of course, besides that all this is terrible, is that we have been taught that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution are just inseparable, when in fact they're sort of warring documents. When the Constitution was being written, again without authority, Thomas Jefferson was out of the country. He was over in France trying to help them, create their own revolution. So we actually have two documents that fight against each other, which actually form, one of the main paradoxes of American politics. So I spent a lot of time yesterday thinking about that, and my own privilege from that, of course, being a white, cisgender heterosexual male. I spent a lot of time thinking in reflection about America and thinking about who we are and where we are and what it used to mean to me. I mean, I grew up in a town that, we had like one of the biggest Independence Day festivals. The carnival, the parade, the Star Spangled Bunting, the cookouts, the hanging out with the family and all that. And the truth is, and if you're here, you've probably read my work before. That I keep making this argument. It is a secular cult. We worship the founding fathers, and we worship America, and we worship people like Abraham Lincoln, and we worship all these people as if they're deities, as if they're infallible, and as if American history is just this really smooth story without a lot of ugliness. And the problem is that a lot of us were caught up in that for a very long time. And what happened was, obviously, we weren't paying attention to people who were being oppressed and were being treated terribly. And it's becoming more and more obvious by the day, in part because Donald Trump is president, and he is the absolute worst. So having Donald Trump as president has made it very clear how screwed up America is. And luckily, the good news is here we are on a Sunday evening talking about that, talking about history, talking about politics. It's good to get us talking. We have to get him out of the White House, but that's a different story altogether. But yeah, so that's how I spent the 4th of July, and I hope you had a decent one. I hope you're still having a decent one. And I think it's really cool that you've come to hang out with me on a Sunday night to drink bourbon. So cheers. Okay, so I've got some questions here I'm going to go through for like the next 50 minutes or so. Hang out, be cool. If you have questions, put them over here in the chat box. I'll get to as many as I possibly can. The first one is from CY, who asked a really big question, which is, why is America's COVID response so awful? It's because the coronavirus pandemic is all of America's problems rolled into one. I've been working on this theory for a while that America basically at this point, it's like, you ever done that thing where you get into a junk drawer and you're looking for like a electrical cord or something like that, and you find that it's just got jumbled up into a bunch of knots, and maybe you got some earbuds in there or whatever, and you end up with this big giant mess, and you don't even know where to start on the knot. As soon as you pull something, it actually gets tighter over here and it gets worse over here. The problem is that all of America's problems, and there are many of them, be it racism, economic inequality, misogyny, toxic individualism, cult-like belief in the idea of America, wars against education and experts in science. You take all of these things and you mix them together in a bowl, and what comes out is the coronavirus pandemic crisis. This country is not capable in its government to really handle problems anymore. I mean, Donald Trump is a figurehead. He has no interest in actually being president and solving problems. He's there to destroy government as an impediment towards corruption and profit. He has no interest in actually helping anyone or using federal resources to help anyone. We saw that when they were talking about, what was it Kushner said? He said something like our federal inventory of, life-saving devices. That's not what Trump's there for. Trump's there to be a mascot while making money and, getting his attention fixed because he's addicted to it. The problem is also that America has this really, really insipid culture. On one hand, one of the biggest problems is what I would call corporate delegation, which is that nobody wants to take responsibility for anything. You keep seeing this. It's like Trump will not institute anything that will actually take on the pandemic. He keeps telling governors that they need to take care of it, and meanwhile yelling at them and talking about how much they're failing. Meanwhile, the governors can either institute mask policies or shut things down, or then you have other Republican governors who refuse to do that because they don't want to piss off their constituents, and so then they send the buck down to the local level. And this is what happens, when you actually have corporate governance. What happens is that people don't want to take responsibility, because to take responsibility means that you're making a decision which will result in consequences. So from the very top down to the bottom, it's just been a total failure of leadership. But on top of that, the Republican Party does not exist in the reality that we do. They just don't. They have crafted their own boutique alternate reality, which is the only way that they can win elections. They don't actually have principles. We've talked about this on social media. They're not actually pro-life. They're not actually fiscally conservative. They're not socially conservative. They don't really care about abortion. These are all political cudgels that they use to control people and win elections. So we have one of the major parties who has no interest whatsoever in living in a reality that resembles our own. And for decades now, they and major corporations and the wealthy have attacked scientists and education and experts. Why? Because they're in bed with energy companies who have known since the 1980s that climate change was real. And so as a result, they had to attack academics and experts and scientists. So they've created a situation. And some of you might remember this. I've been thinking about this for the past couple of days. Think about when, the seatbelt laws came into effect, or when all of a sudden restaurants started having smoking sections, or they started banning smoking. And all of a sudden people were like, well, you can't do that. You're infringing on my freedom. But they didn't want to take care of other people. And the mask situation is just that, like, exacerbated. Like, I wear a mask outside, not because it's going to keep me from getting coronavirus. It's so if I'm accidentally infectious, I'm not going to give somebody else coronavirus. It is part of being in a shared society. I do it for you. You should do it for me. The problem is that the Republican Party has created this system. It's like game theory, where all these people are so lost within themselves. They want to pretend that they're tough and that they're not afraid of viruses, which unfortunately is what you're seeing with all the young people who are partying. They're really caught up in their identities, and they don't want to talk about the fact that they're frightened of death, because it's the same thing as cigarettes. People sometimes smoke cigarettes because they want to project some sort of strength or lack of fear. So you've just got a perfect situation in America. And we also have a system of, we have an economic system where you have a bunch of wealthy people who don't want to open the door for actual economic reform, because the moment you start talking about economic reform is the moment that we start talking about why we have economic inequality in the first place, which, could lead to a revolutionary situation. And then on top of that, you have a healthcare system that has been destroyed again by a Republican Party that doesn't exist in a reality that looks like our own. If you really want to know how this whole thing came about, go back and look during the Clinton era, and how all these like attempts to try and modernize healthcare were just completely scuttled by the Republican Party, who knew that healthcare sucked and it needed reform, but because they didn't want to suffer a political loss or give Clinton a political win, they just said there was no problem in healthcare, and that's the issue. And I just saw John Ballard said, review the origin of corporate personhood. That's a story for another day, which is just really great. Which is where one of the guys who helped write the amendment that gave freed slaves personhood in the Constitution, perjured himself in order to help corporations, lied about the fact that that amendment was supposedly for corporations, which it wasn't, and then Supreme Court justices on the court lied about it. And then all of a sudden, corporate personhood became a thing, and it was a lie based upon a lie based upon a lie. So it's all terrible, and it's really bad. The coronavirus pandemic has exposed all of the main and grating and bleeding problems of America, and it's brought them to the forefront, which is one of the reasons, again, why I think this 4th of July weekend was really hard. I mean, as we are right now, July 5th, 2020, we're a failing state. And listen, I know that's not fun. I know that doesn't make, Sunday with bourbon go down any better. But we're a failing state right now. We do not provide anything for anyone. That's why our main product right now is the oppression of protesters. If you can't help people and you can't carry out your part of the social contract, the only thing left to do is to crush rebellions from people who are pissed off about the fact that you can't give them anything. That's what a failed state does, and that's what America under Donald Trump is right now. Matt. Oh, okay. I got a couple questions here I'm going to group together because I want to talk tonight about conspiracy theories, and in particular QAnon, which is something we have to address. So I have a couple questions. I'm going to loop them all together. Matt asked, is the left afraid to address the QAnon conspiracy head on for fear of legitimizing it? Is that a valid concern? Real fast, I'll answer that before I move on to the next part. Yeah, it's not about fear. The problem is that the American left, in a lot of cases, views this stuff as sort of not funny, but not serious. It's like the Trump campaign. I was covering the Trump campaign in 2016. I was sneaking into rallies. I was talking to supporters. I was moving out of the media pen and actually like going from person to person. And I was just screaming to everyone who would listen, like, these people not only believe in Trump, he's not a joke to them, but these people are like really buying what he's selling. And what they're talking about is straight up fascism. They're talking about hunting down liberals. They're talking about imprisoning journalists. They're talking about forced lobotomies. They're talking about murder. They're like spouting white supremacist ideas, right? That's what was going on in the Trump rallies. And meanwhile, a lot of the American left snickered at it, left and right. I mean, you might remember the Huffington Post said they weren't going to cover him on the political page. They were going to cover him in entertainment. They didn't believe that he could possibly ever win because they believed that somehow or another America was going to come together and vote against him or whatever, which is understandable. I mean, you don't want to believe, again, that America is a failing state. That's a really scary idea. The QAnon thing is batshit insane. That's literally the only way. I've been following it for a while just to see what it was because I noticed that they were taking the Trumpian ideas and they were turning them into a religion all of their own. And I thought that was important, particularly in the age of social media and the online world. But I started paying even closer attention in the past few months because what I started to notice is that it had grown and it had metastasized and it went from being online, like something that people did on like YouTube, to suddenly being something that they did in the real world. And I started seeing it. And I cover a lot of Trump supporters, and I watch how they're being radicalized. I watch how they start getting brought into the fold by white supremacist groups, right? Because that's how it happens. You start off as a Trump supporter, and you're pissed off at everything, and you don't really believe in the government, which is why you vote for Trump. And suddenly you start being brought in slowly but surely by white supremacists, which is, I've talked to a bunch of ex-white supremacists for my own research. And they tell me left and right, that's what they do. They start off by taking these Trump supporters who are angry and insecure and unhappy, and then they start training them on some white supremacist propaganda and memes. Well, I started to notice that the same people who were being radicalized by the Trump campaign and Trumpism, but also white supremacy, were becoming radicalized in QAnon. And it started coming together in this really terrifying sort of link, right? And what I realized over time is that the QAnon movement is just the New World Order conspiracy theory, which is the Elders of the Protocol, or the Protocols of the Elders of Zion conspiracy theory, of course, which inspired not just fascism, but, the Third Reich in Germany. And basically what is happening is QAnon has been scrubbed clean of elements of white supremacy. They don't talk about white supremacy. They pretend to be this pluralist sort of idea or mission that will lead to a better and more free and equal society. It's white supremacy. And that's what all of these major conspiracy theories are about. They're white people being terrified that, people on the outside, puppet masters, always Jewish people like George Soros, are manipulating people of color to rise up and destabilize America. This is how it's been since the founding, the Confederacy. You can go back to post-World War I, after the Russian Revolution, where they believed that, the communists were manipulating black people. That also happened again in the 1950s and 1960s. It's the same story every time. But QAnon, of course, is this new iteration of it. It's this online social media radicalization. And it has brought in so many new age people who don't trust the government. They don't trust medicine, all this stuff. And so they've all come together into this one pursuit. The problem, and real fast, somebody wrote here, this was from Jay. What do you make of General Michael Flynn taking the QAnon digital soldier oath? Does he believe this stuff? So for those of you who aren't familiar, so this QAnon thing is, oh my God, it's just batshit bullshit insane. And it takes place on, it's now called 8kun, I believe. It used to be 8chan, and before that 4chan. It's just this stupid online forum where everybody goes on and they're completely racist and xenophobic and sexist. And it's just a fraud. Right now, I think most experts believe it's just the owner of 8kun who's doing it. They sends out all these Nostradamus-like proclamations, and then people go looking for, proof, and they're, online internet sleuthing or whatever. And it actually is a really, really advanced type of cult idea because it brings the people in and it gives them the ability to feel like they're finding secret information by, I don't know, watching Avengers movies and finding Easter eggs. Anyway, the problem isn't just that. If you want to go out and you want to live action role play, or you want to pretend like you're finding a conspiracy, do it, whatever, just don't hurt anybody. But the problem is that QAnon, which is also the deep state, it's one and the same. It's a fascistic movement. And here's why it's fascism. It tells people that there is an institutional conspiracy against them that could kill them. It's killing children every day. It's part of this human trafficking conspiracy. It's intentionally bringing down America, ruining the economy, putting people out of work, all this stuff, right? It's killed, it's going to kill more, and it's going to kill more if it doesn't get stopped. Well, what ends up happening is if the institution itself is completely corrupted and the people who corrupted it are coming to kill you and your family, what do? And the whole point of that is it's kill or be killed. And that's what conspiracy theories do, is that they legitimize fascistic movements. Because all of a sudden, if it's your life or someone else's life or your children's lives or someone you love's life or the country, if it's them or somebody's life or freedom, you take them out. I mean, this is the old thing. God, what was it? It's Dick Cheney's whole like 24 rant where it's like, we got to go into Iraq or else the smoking gun will be a mushroom cloud. That's what happens with fascism, is you create a threat that isn't real, that people believe in, and then you tell them, we have to do whatever we have to do, and that's just it. We're talking about extra legal arrest. We're talking about suppression of people. We're talking about conspiracies. We're talking about murder. I mean, one of the reasons why this stuff is going crazy right now is that on one hand, you have, Michael Flynn, who, by the way, is like a total traitor to this country and a fascist. I mean, this guy was trying to work with like murderers left and right and trying to get a backroom line with Russia, which, by the way, not enough has been made of the fact that he was on the short list of Donald Trump's VP candidates. So let's just put that out there, while we're talking about it. This guy goes out, who's a military general, and does like this oath, which is like an oath of office or an oath of like a military person. And he swears allegiance to QAnon like all these other people are doing. Meanwhile, you have a guy up in Canada who rams the prime minister's residence. You have people in America who are going to assassinate Joe Biden, or they're showing up at one business after another. They're telling everyone about cabals and secret child tunnels and all this stuff. It has metastasized from an online kooky conspiracy thing into a real life threat. And I've talked to security experts. I'm talking about people from around the world who now consider QAnon to be a terrorist threat. Like governments, and I don't know what America is doing about it, because God knows that Trump's administration loves these people, loves flirting with them and retweeting them and amplifying them. Like, I don't know what America is doing about it, but I can tell you that other countries have experts on it that are like, these people are radicalized and they're incredibly dangerous. So does the left take them seriously? No, they don't. And they don't take them seriously because it's batshit insane. And if you've ever watched one of their documentaries or one of their videos, they're really not compelling. They're poorly made. I mean, the jumps, they believe that JFK Jr. is still alive and he's been hiding until he could be with Donald Trump. They believe in time travel. They believe in reptilians. You name it. They believe in just insane things. But that brings me to the main point that I wanted to talk about here. And somebody asked me, how many people do I think believe in this stuff? I'm not sure. I don't think that we know how many people do. But here's what you need to walk away from this with. People believe it. They actually believe it. And they believe that they are soldiers in an invisible war, which, by the way, is how you get the New World Order conspiracy theory and Timothy McVeigh blowing up the Oklahoma City federal building. That's what happens. People who believe they're in an invisible war take it upon themselves to kill people. McVeigh did that. The MAGA bomber who sent out a bunch of pipe bombs to people thought he was doing that. We've had people now during these protests get run over. They've been shot. We've had people running around with chainsaws and knives and guns. These people believe they're in an invisible war. And actually, that is a side byproduct of what the Republican Party has done by creating this alternate reality. They're a fascistic movement. And listen, I don't say that lightly. I'm not trying to say that to be provocative. I take this a lot more seriously than that. I don't want to come out here and, like somehow or another try and ramp this stuff up in order to do something. But you need to understand that fascistic movements have been doing this for so long, and it's always the exact same thing. So there is that. That's the one thing to walk away from this with. But the other thing is that it's just going to get worse. And it's going to get worse until people take it seriously. And other people out there, again, other countries, they take it seriously. They understand that this thing is dangerous. It's going to lead to deaths. It's going to lead to actions. Who knows what will come of this, but it's dangerous. And the third thing, and this is the main thing I want you to take from this, we're not just in a political crisis. We're not just in an existential crisis. We're in a mental health crisis in this country. We don't talk about it. right? Because for years it's been sneered at and we haven't had insurance for it and healthcare sucks or whatever. We are in a period of time where we have a large portion of Americans who aren't well. And listen, I'm saying this as somebody who suffers from anxiety and has suffered from depression. Like, that's not making light of the idea of mental wellness or mental illness. There are a lot of people in this country who are not well right now, and they are suffering. And they are very, very frustrated with the state of the country. They're not getting the help that they need. And so they are getting pulled more and more into radicalization. And that's what radical groups do. They bring in people who aren't well and who are frustrated, and they need something to define them and give them purpose. And when you have a bad economy, you have an unequal society, and you have a bunch of people who don't know what they're going to do next, they get pulled in and they get radicalized. And that's what's happening not just with QAnon, but also with the Trump movement. We're in a mental health crisis. And until we start looking at it like that, you can read all the articles you want in the New York Times and the Washington Post that are like, Trump supporters believe this, or they disagree with this, or we disagree about facts, or whatever. The truth is that we have a real problem in this country that isn't going to get fixed until we actually reckon with what it is. So yeah, I think it's absolutely dangerous and something that people need to pay attention to. QAnon it's not the only part of this, but it's a big chunk of it. Joe, and this sort of fits into it. What's your stance on Jeffrey Epstein and the arrest of Maxwell? Straight up, real fast, I saw Wedge talk about Anna Merlin. I was on a panel with Anna Merlin a couple years ago. She is really smart, really talented, and her work gets into all this stuff. You should check her out. Okay, so what do I think about Jeffrey Epstein and Maxwell being arrested and Epstein's death? First of all, evil as shit. Just awful, awful people. And this is one of the more frustrating parts about all of this is I don't sort of see the world as black and white. I don't see it as I talk about this on the Muckrake podcast all the time. I don't necessarily look at everything on a spectrum of left and right because I think left and right is just gone. I think anybody who has ties with Epstein and it gets proven through investigations or a court of law that they have abused people or been involved in all of this stuff, I think they should go to jail. I don't care if it's a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian, a Green Party member. Like, evil is evil. And if you're involved in this stuff, like, you deserve to go to jail. And I don't think that's a political issue. I think that's a human issue. But I think the other thing that we can talk about with that is that power corrupts. And unfortunately, in America, power and wealth have corrupted people for a very long time. I mean, we're dealing with Donald Trump right now. Let me turn this light up. We're dealing with Donald Trump right now. And what we have seen with him is somebody who's gotten everything that he's ever wanted and is just a broken shell of a human being. He has no morals. He has no loyalty, none of that. I mean, there's a reason why he hung out with Epstein. There's a reason why all those disgusting pictures and videos of him exist. Like, of course, he knew about this stuff. I mean, one of his quotes, of course, was he said, what did he say? He said, oh, Jeffrey Epstein likes to have fun and he enjoys young women. Well, he knew what was going on. Let's just be honest with him. I mean, this is a person who admitted, being a sexual assaulter, before he was, ever elected president. He is who he is. Power corrupts. And that's the unfortunate part, is that the American system, the economic system and the political system and even the cultural system is set up to reward people like them. It's set up to reward people who are lacking that moral ability or ethical ability. And basically it rewards people who, are just more than willing to slit the throat of the person next to them. And it shouldn't be like that. It's one of our main problems and one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in. Sarah asked, what role does the Vietnam War play in all this craziness? A big chunk of it. I wrote in my book, The Man They Wanted Me to Be, which you haven't read, is all about the masculine crisis in America that led to Donald Trump. Vietnam was really rough on people, man. The loss of the war like dealt this massive masculine blow to the culture, and as a result, you have a bunch of people wandering around, particularly the boomer generation, who are still pissed off and emasculated by it. And America had to go out and prove itself to be stronger. It's one of the reasons why we had to have the first Gulf War the way we did, and possibly even the second Gulf War. I mean, one of the reasons why we have, these wars without end, and why we have the worship of militarism the way we do in this country. It dealt a massive blow to the psyche of America, and white men in particular have not recovered. I mean, it has created a big, giant masculine crisis in this country. And it's one of the reasons why I don't know. You have Donald Trump out there acting like a bully, and you have like an entire base of men who are driving big, giant trucks and not wearing masks. So, yeah, I think the Vietnam War played a big role in that. Not to mention geopolitics, which we could talk about all night. That's a whole different thing. On a similar note, Julia, regular listener and caller, white male narcissist running for president. And then Amy asked, has the presidency always been primarily a rich man's game? Absolutely, the presidency has always been a rich man's game, even more so now. I've talked about this on here for a few times and on the podcast. One of the problems with American politics is that you have to be wealthy in order to run for office. It's one of our biggest issues. It has, because of a lack of campaign finance reform, people who run for office spend all of their time greasing palms and begging for money, and they take every decision that they ever have to make and run it through the funnel of special interest and donors. It's a big, giant mess. It's a narcissistic game as well. I've known a lot of politicians. I've been around a lot of campaigns, and I can tell you that a big chunk of people who run for government do it for the ego boost. They do it for the narcissistic addiction. They want people to adore them and pay attention to them. I mean, Donald Trump didn't actually want to be president in order to help people. He wanted to be the center of every conversation, from now until he dies. That's what he wants. He's not interested in making hard decisions or reading briefings or any of that stuff. He's interested in, getting out there and getting paid attention to, and, just being continually showered with praise and worship. I mean, there's a reason he's a cult leader. That's who he is. That's who he's been. John Ballard asked, any thoughts about black separatist groups? New York Times may have referenced them at Stone Mountain. It's not my place to talk to people, people of color, and tell them how to organize or what to do or what to believe. I can tell you this, though. I live in Georgia. Stone Mountain needs to go down yesterday. It is repugnant that still exists, and that there's an entire culture around it up there in northern Georgia that is based around worship of the Confederacy. And that is all about sending a message to black people that, the Confederacy survived the Civil War. It survived in our institutions, in our culture, in our politics, and in the economy. So no, I read a little bit about people going there and possibly doing something, but until the community comes around on it, because right now Stone Mountain, that's like one of their big attractions, is having people come up and celebrate the Confederacy. When I moved down here, I've been down in Georgia since 2012. I was just shocked. You'll be driving down the highway and there will just be like Confederate flag shops, and you go in and it's just like trinkets left and right of all this, but it's a lot. So Gar just asked, and I think this is a good question, not intending this to be antagonistic, but what's the line between these dangerous conspiracy theories and unmasking these movements? It's a great question, because actually one of the things that conspiracy theories do, and Donald Trump actually has been the benefactor of this a lot of times. So I was reporting on the 2016 election, and I was covering the Trump campaign. I was going into these rallies, and I would have people who were in the know start to leak to me stuff about the Russia connections, and they would just say, "Listen, there's something going on between this campaign and Russia. I don't know what it is. I feel weird about it." And I tried to tell people, I tried to get the word out, and immediately it was like, "Oh, this is conspiracy theories. It's alarmist." But what actually happened was that Trump and people like him used how insane the idea of Russian collusion was against everyone. Because everyone was like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. That's insane. And as a result, it gave him something to hide behind. Now, the conspiracy that we're talking about here, I was talking about with QAnon and the New World Order and all of that. Here's the simple truth, and here's how to get to the bottom of conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are always told by people who have power. And I'm talking about the ones that are manufactured and they're used as weaponized misinformation. They're always told by people in power in order to keep power. Okay? So one of the reasons why the New World Order and the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and now the Deep State and QAnon, that they all fit in and interlock, is because these are the lies that white supremacists tell about people trying to unseat white supremacy. You'll notice whenever you listen to like an Alex Jones or you listen to one of these conspiracy peddlers, it's always about, again, these Jewish cabals like puppet masters influencing people of color, LGBTQ Americans, and women, and trying to bring them together, and liberals, right, on their payroll, always trying to bring them together to unseat a place of power. Now, what actually happens is the people who are telling the conspiracy theories are projecting their own behaviors on other people. So white supremacists have always said there's a conspiracy against them while they're involved in a conspiracy. In fact, one of the really interesting things I found, again, researching American rule, was the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was actually a plagiarized document that was a play about white supremacist manipulation. Think about that for a second, okay? It was saying that other people were guilty of doing what the white people were doing. So the conspiracy theories we're talking about are always from the top down, about securing power or keeping power. They're about the fear of losing power, and that's why they bring people in. Like, you are under attack, you need a protector, which is why Tucker Carlson is all over the place with this bullshit, talking about the Republican Party being the protector of the people. But that's what the Republican Party has done and what Trumpism does. Okay. Okay, Kristen says, are the loyal followers of 45 completely lost to conspiracy theories and disinformation, or there be a moment where they realize they've been conned? It's a great question. I think there are going to be people for the rest of their lives who believe that Donald Trump was one of the greatest presidents ever, and that he was unfairly maligned and he had to deal with a conspiracy theory. I don't know if the rest of you have dealt with this, but my family was very, very fond of talking about Richard Nixon and saying, well, he didn't get caught doing anything that other people didn't do, right? And that Richard Nixon was, the victim of conspiracy theories and people coming after him, which is a bunch of bullshit. And, Trump is going to have that. There are going to be people who go to their graves. There's going to be time, if there is an America, if there is a future, if climate change doesn't have its way, there are going to be people at their funerals where people are going to give a eulogy, and they're going to be like, he loved that Donald Trump. There are going to be MAGA caskets in the future. And that's the problem, is you're actually going to see people who continue this on. Even after he's not president, even after Donald Trump passes away, you're going to see people who still believe this bullshit. Now, that doesn't mean everybody is lost in it, because what I was talking about earlier with the people lost in misinformation and conspiracy theories, a lot of them are what I would call tourists. They're people who they believe the QAnon stuff, or they believe the deep state stuff, or they're sharing white supremacist propaganda, but they don't believe that they're racist. They don't believe that they're prejudiced. They don't believe that they're fascistic. They actually believe that they're realists, right? And that this stuff just happens to be talking to them. I saw an interesting thing today. It's an account on Facebook I'm following that has been radicalized over the past few months. And on one hand, she was sharing QAnon, fascistic Trump stuff with Confederate flags. And on the other, she was sharing like pictures of Native Americans and talking about how they've been infringed on. It's like this weird cognitive dissonance that's always working itself on. And it's a very weird thing, because these people might get brought back into the fold. And if the economy gets better, and if economic inequality is sort of squashed, they might not be as extreme anymore, right? A lot of people bought into Donald Trump because they really believed he was a giant middle finger to the system. And there's a lot of people who really believe that everything is screwed up, which it is, and they really believe that Donald Trump was the answer to those problems. I mean, there's a reason why people feel like things are screwed up. This country is not fair, and it has been tuned to not be fair to people. I mean, it is an unequal, frustrating, pissed off system that we're in, and it's terrible. It sucks. And so, like, if things get better and we can actually get to some more economic inequality, maybe some of these people will back off from the edge. I know people in my family who are part of it who would probably back off from the edge. So do I think that all of them will come back? No. Again, I think you're going to have MAGA funerals in the future. And I think that is going to be weird and dystopian. But yeah, I think there's some people who will come back. Does that mean that they're going to be, forces for social justice or, like liberals? No, I don't think that's true. But there's a lot of people who've been radicalized over the past few years who I think could come back. Once Trump hopefully loses the election in November, what do you anticipate his plan will be? He'll claim election fraud by mail. He's absolutely going to claim fraud. I mean, this is a guy who he won't accept reality. I always tell people this. I don't want to scare people. I don't want to be an alarmist. But the thing that I always talk about is the fact that in 2012, when Mitt Romney lost to Barack Obama, and lost badly, and remember that Donald Trump was not fond of Mitt Romney. That wasn't his guy. And obviously he doesn't love Mitt Romney more than he loves himself. Immediately when Mitt Romney lost to Barack Obama, Donald Trump tweeted out to his followers, who weren't the same followers, but still, he tweeted out that the country had been taken over and that they should march on Washington and it was time for a revolution. Uh, he's not going to go lightly. I think he will claim voter fraud. I recorded an interview for this week. I think it's going to be on the Muckrake podcast, maybe tomorrow, maybe on Thursday. We'll see, with a guy named Josh Berthum. And if you haven't, it's a great interview. I can't wait till it comes out. But if you haven't yet, he wrote an article called 7 Hours in November, which he was talking about how the 7 hours between the first poll closings on the day of the presidential election and 2 a.m. in the morning are going to be 7 of the most dangerous hours in American history. And I think he's absolutely right. I don't think Trump is going to accept defeat. I don't think he's going to be gracious. Maybe he'll be carried out of the White House. Maybe he'll call for some sort of insurrection. I would not doubt it. I mean, that's who he is. The other part of me, I'm really hopeful about this. He doesn't like the job. He hates it. And there's a hope in my heart that he will just be like, well, thank God that's done. I can go play golf. I talked about this on the podcast not too long ago. He's going to be such a happy ex-president. I mean, if he gets out of office and he still has some years ahead of him, I mean, my God, he'll go on Fox News or OAN, and maybe they'll even make up an Oval Office set, and he can just be angry and yell things and play golf. And that's what, ex-presidents do. They go around playing golf, shaking hands, all that stuff. That would be like Trump's heaven. So there's a hope in my heart that he just gets destroyed and gets his doors blown off. And he's just like, well, I'm done, and I now go to be retired, and people will love on me and worship me wherever. Worst case scenario is that he refuses it and he sends us into a constitutional crisis. And at that point, I mean, it's really anybody's guess what happens. You need to be ready for that, though. Assuming Trump loses, what happens with the Republicans? How do they act within a Biden presidency? I mean, my God, we've already seen this. I mean, yeah, by the way, real fast, someone said, do I think he's going to go to prison? I don't know. I'll be honest with you, and I hope we can hear this in all honesty and graciousness and affection. I've been burned a lot by being hopeful about the system taking care of Trump. Like everybody else, I was hopeful that Robert Mueller would do his job and the system would, burp up Donald Trump like so much bad food. But, people who are rich, powerful white men have a way of falling through the system and not having consequences. So I don't know if he's going to go to prison. I don't know if he'll be prosecuted. I'm just going to wait and see what happens. That prognostication has a way of breaking your heart, and that's the sad truth of it. What does the Republican Party look like if Joe Biden wins? I think you're seeing it now. I mean, Joe Biden is pretty much a center-left Democrat. I mean, I've talked about it on the podcast a lot. He's one of the main architects of like the modern police state. He has worked across the aisle constantly. He's been, he was in the Senate for forever. He's an institution in Washington. They're still going to treat him like he's a radical. And that's the sad truth is no matter what he does, no matter how many times he reaches across the aisle, that's what's going to happen. I mean, Barack Obama, bless his heart, did everything he could to try and make them believe that he was, a Reaganite. He quoted Reagan in every speech that he possibly could. He reached across the aisle constantly, and they treated him like he was a secret Muslim traitor. And on top of that, if you go back to like somebody like Bill Clinton, as a campaign strategy, decided that he couldn't fight republicanism and decided to put a Democratic spin on it. I mean, all of his programs were more or less moderate to center-right programs, and Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh and all of them painted him like he was a socialist destroyer. I mean, that's what's going to happen with Joe Biden. Now, does that mean that some of the Republicans won't come along with him? Maybe they will, and maybe some of them will have an attack of conscience, but I haven't seen that. I have not seen anything from the Republican Party that tells me that they have a conscience left. It would be nice if they did, but yeah, I don't see that necessarily happening. It would be great if they're repudiated. I have said it before and I've said it again. The Republican Party needs to go away. They can have a new name. They can get a new logo, get rid of the elephant. They keep the elephant. I don't give a shit. But start a new party, because this one is a fascistic movement. It has lost every bearing of principle and direction that it's had. Its only principle is the collection of power and profit. They need to go away. And in a just, sane world, which America is not, you would see them get the doors blown off in November, and you would see a massive realignment. But the massive realignment was supposed to happen after Barack Obama got reelected. And they said we have to start reaching out to people of color, and we have to build a larger tent and embrace a pluralist society. They thought they were going to have Marco Rubio, and they went to Donald Trump. So I think they're done as an actual principled movement, and I think that they need to be replaced. I don't think there's a lot of redeeming for the Republican Party. Dismantle asked, what is the most likely Trump's Reichstag fire moment? So here's the thing, and if we can have some hope, let's have some hope. I think it would have been the protest. I think that the fire in D.C. at the church, which I have not been told anything by anybody who was in D.C. that makes me believe the protesters did that. And certainly I've heard enough to believe that maybe, instigators trying to cause problems did it. When that church got set on fire and Trump went out in front of it with the Bible, I think that was his shot. Now, of course, it's July 5th. We still have, oh my God, way too much time until the election. There's plenty of time for another Reichstag moment. Tensions are high. People are getting killed. The last couple of speeches that Trump has given, full on white supremacist, not even diluted white supremacy, not even dog whistles, just straight white supremacy. So I think if Donald Trump thinks that he might not only lose the election, but might face prosecution and public humiliation, yeah, I think he could pull out any and all stops. And there's absolutely nothing that I have seen so far that tells me he would be above a Reichstag fire situation. I think they've already tried a few out. They've already tested a few. Real fast, Taos says, can we rely on the military to remain neutral? If Trump gets beaten in the election, I have no idea. I have hope because, it was immediately after Trump started talking about troops firing on civilians, you start seeing the Joint Chiefs of Staff sending out memos that said, you have an oath to the Constitution. Don't forget that. That gave me hope that maybe they would not, be unloyal or disloyal to the Constitution. It concerns me because, as we all know, the military and law enforcement they've been infiltrated by white supremacists. We've seen it. We know it time and time again. And even the FBI, which, is not exactly a left-leaning organization, they know it's part and parcel of what's happened in modern law enforcement and the military. So, yeah, that terrifies me. Oh, yeah, absolutely. The militia's ready to go. There are people all around this country who have been waiting for this situation. They've been, I know people in my family, in my circle, in the place where I grew up, they've been gathering guns and prepper supplies, waiting on a racial war for decades now. If Trump said the word go, they would go. They've been waiting on an explicit direction from him. And obviously they've been out in the towns and cities and they've been ready to go. Absolutely. There are militias ready to go in all this. What do I make of Clarence Thomas possibly retiring and Mitch McConnell being a hypocrite about election year appointments? First of all, hey, Oliu, how's it going, man? Drinking bullet. Cheers. Oliu's got a new dog. Been enjoying those pictures. What do I make about Clarence Thomas possibly resigning in time for the election? First of all, good riddance. What a piece of wasted space Clarence Thomas is. For those of you who aren't familiar, when he was being passed by the Senate, it came out that he was a sexual predator, and he just has added nothing. Constitutional scholars are shocked. They almost fall out of their seats when he says a word. So would it be good if he got replaced by somebody? Absolutely. The other hope with this, and by the way, the Mitch McConnell hypocrisy thing, this is and I hate to say this because I love Jon Stewart and The Daily Show. Pointing out Mitch McConnell's political hypocrisy at this point is Daily Show 2012, 2013 stuff. We all know he's a hypocrite. We all know that he has no principles. We know that he'll say one thing one day and another thing another and smile about it and just continue to do it. My hope is that if Clarence Thomas resigns and the Republicans go ahead and play hardball and pass someone and are just complete and utter hypocrites before the election, there's always a hope that somebody gets in there. And it's like a Justice Roberts. They think he's more conservative than he is, and he gets in and he has a level mind. We know who Clarence Thomas is. We know what his seat represents. It's not going to change the balance of the court. There's a possibility maybe that we could hold up the appointment until a Democratic president comes into power, but that's unlikely. But there's always, it's a coin flip sometimes. These people get in and they are completely different than what you think they are. So Clarence Thomas, good riddance. That guy sucks anyway, always has. him retiring and moving on, it would be a possibility to get somebody in there who maybe they'd be a hardliner more than him, but they would still vote the way that he does. Maybe the opinions would get worse, but there's even the possibility that somebody could get in there and surprise people. YRK says, what should be the plan for Democrats if Trump remains installed as president in 2021? I have to be honest for a moment. Just to be real, take a drink. If Donald Trump wins re-election or holds on to power as an authoritarian who doesn't recognize the will of the people, and both of those things are possible, the Democratic Party needs to completely reboot itself. I mean, not only do you have a person here who is an authoritarian who needs to be, cut off at the knees at every possibility, he's a totally incompetent president. He has nothing to run on. He has no plan for a second term outside of a statue garden to honor Scalia or whatever bullshit he's talking about. If the Democratic Party loses this election, I don't know what kind of argument the mainstream Democrats have to make anymore. And that's not necessarily an indictment of the people. It's an indictment of American politics and what people are asking for or what people need. So if Donald Trump wins the election, it has to be a complete reshuffling of the Democratic Party. And I would personally argue, and I'm not a Democrat. I'm not. After I did research on my book, American Rule, and I learned about the party, I didn't want to be an official member of the party anymore. That being said, I will break my hand voting against Donald Trump. I don't care who it is, whoever can beat him, I will break my hand hitting the touchscreen to do it. Personally, if this election gets lost and Donald Trump gets actually reelected, like it actually happens, I would love to see a grassroots, bottom-up remaking of the Democratic Party. I would love to see Democratic citizens and what they want start to actually direct how the party works as opposed to it going from top down, which is how it's been particularly for the past few decades. So yeah, it would need a reshuffling. If Donald Trump holds on to power as an authoritarian who doesn't listen to the democratic process, we've got bigger problems than parties. At that point, it needs to go from hashtag resistance and wearing shirts that say resistance or whatever, and lionizing again people like Robert Mueller or Nancy Pelosi. It has to move to a societal resistance. It has to move to mass action. And I'll just say this, and there'll be plenty more Bourbon Sundays before now in November. We have to be ready in November that if he steals the election and if he, and if he holds on to power through nefarious means, we have to be ready for mass action. We have to be ready to be out in the streets. And that's just the truth of it. Because if you ever study authoritarian states and you study these places where people like Trump have come to power and have become mainstays in power, it's almost impossible to get rid of them. It's like bed bugs. They just don't go away, and they hold on to power by any means. And if it starts going that way, what ends up happening, and I've talked about this a lot on the Muckrake podcast, and I talk about this also in my book, American Rule. What ends up happening if Trump holds on by illegal measures or authoritarian measures is you're going to end up in what's called a managed democracy, a managed democratic state, which looks like a democracy. It looks like a functional liberal democracy, but underneath everything is managed and controlled. It's what's happening in Russia right now. And what happens over time, the more that it happens and the more that opposition is crushed, the more that apathy builds and the more that they gain a grip on power. So November, you need to go out early. You need to vote. You need to be ready to be out in the street if necessary. Again, I'm talking to Josh Berthoum. The interview's already taped. It's really good. I hope you'll listen to it on the Muckrake podcast. Those 7 hours between when polls close and 2 a.m., I think are going to be a turning point for America. And you need to be ready for anything. You need to be ready to be out in the streets. So that's my thing. Get out, vote early, and be ready for whatever happens. Yeah, you have to take this threat seriously. I think a lot of people are in denial about it, unfortunately. All right, last question of the night. I got an email and somebody asked, why do I hate America? And I wanted to end with this. I don't hate America. I love America. I love America so much that I want it to be better. Loving America does not mean worshiping at an altar of false idols and false gods. this country has a lot of problems, and it's had a lot of problems since its founding. It was founded by white, wealthy, slaveholding men, and the entire construction of the country was built around white, slaveholding, wealthy men. Um, this country has a lot of potential more than other countries that weren't necessarily founded during the Enlightenment or founded based on Enlightenment ideals or even the principles of a democratic society. If America actually lived up to its espoused principles, it would be an amazing country. It would be a utopic society. Um, the problem is that people in this country have confused what patriotism is. Patriotism should be about believing that a country can be better and wishing for it and working for it, as opposed to sitting back and collecting all of the privilege that the country gives you simply because you have a certain color skin or you are a certain gender. It's disgusting to worship a country. It really, really is. You can believe in people in the country who have been good and movements that have been good, and you can believe in the potential for good. But at that point, it's just idolatry. That's all it is. So I don't hate America. I'm a realist. I actually look at the history of America and I've examined what America is. And, you know, it could be great if it lived up to its principles. It doesn't mean I hate it. It means I'm a realist. And it means, and matter of fact, I would even say it's more than being a realist. I would say that being a pessimist is believing that America is as good as it could be. Because quite frankly, I'm tired. I'm sure you are too. You would not be here talking about politics at 9 p.m. on a Sunday of a holiday weekend if you felt good about this country right now. It's not great. It's not great right now. And the way the economic system works, it tires us out. It wears us down. I'm an academic. I'm supposed to go back and teach next month in a county that is overrun by coronavirus, by the pandemic. People are hospitalized. They're sick. They're dying. We're supposed to bring in a lot of people, like a bunch of students, tens of thousands of students, simply because nobody wants to talk about how to make things better other than to throw people into the maw of a pandemic. I think that's bullshit. I think that's pessimism. I think idealism is realizing that things can be better and being willing to fight for it. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I know you're all tired and exhausted, but you have to believe in like real things. You have to believe in what the country actually is at any given moment and what it could be. And you have to keep aspiring to it. I refuse to accept this country the way that it is right now. I refuse. It is not okay. I've watched the people in my family suffer. I've watched people I love suffer. I'm exhausted by a system that juices you and has lost all humanity and is not fair or equal. It can be better. So no, I don't hate America. I love America enough to admit that it has problems and that it could be better. So, cheers. All right, everyone. I appreciate you coming out. It's awesome of you. Just a couple of things to plug real fast after you hang out with me for an hour drinking bourbon. My book, American Rule, right now is available for pre-order. I would love it if you pick that up. I put a lot of time and effort into it, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. I tell you, I lost some years off my life writing that book. So it'd be awesome if you pick that up. The Muckrake podcast will be back on Tuesday. I believe we're going to have that interview with Josh Berthum with that, talking about 7 hours in November. He's really great. He's on Twitter too. You should check him out. We'll have another podcast on Friday. We've got a really exciting guest lined up for that. I hope it comes through in the podcast world. Like, you get a lot of really cool guests and you get really pumped about them, and scheduling is rough, but we have a really cool guest hopefully for next Friday. In the meantime, I'll have a new blog post over on the Muckrake on Monday. I'll also have one there on Wednesday and Friday, every other day. And then next Sunday, if everything goes right, I'll be out here in the swampy Southeast Georgia heat, drinking bourbon and talking to you fine folks. Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Be safe.